Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do in war is to show mercy. Sometimes compassion is a crime punishable by death. And sometimes the innocent suffer most not because of what they do, but because of what they refuse to do. This is a story about a woman who saved a life and paid for it with everything she had. It's about the moment when one act of kindness became an act of treason, when protecting a child meant betraying an empire. It's a story that will break your heart, because it's true, because it happened, because in war, humanity itself becomes the enemy.
August 1945. The war was ending, but no one in Japan wanted to admit it. The cities were burning. Tokyo had been reduced to ash by firebombing raids that killed over 100,000 people in a single night. Hiroshima and Nagasaki had been erased from the map by weapons no one could understand. Weapons that turned entire cities into shadows and dust in seconds. The Americans were humming. Everyone knew it, but no one could say it out loud. To speak of surrender was treason. To show weakness was betrayal. The military government demanded total loyalty, absolute obedience, sacrifice unto death. They told the people that surrender was worse than death, that the Americans would torture them, rape their women, murder their children, that it was better to die fighting than to live in shame.
The propaganda was everywhere, on walls, in newspapers, blaring from radios. Death before dishonor, victory or annihilation. The emperor's divine will shall prevail. But in the small coastal town of Shimoda, far from the grand cities and the military headquarters, the propaganda felt hollow, empty. The people there had seen too much death already. They were exhausted, starving, numb. In a small house near the harbor, made of wood and paper that rattled in the wind, lived a woman named Ayaka Tanaka. She was 29 years old, though grief had aged her beyond her years. Her face was thin, drawn, the cheekbones sharp beneath skin that had lost its warmth and color. Her hands were calloused from factory work, the fingers stained with chemicals and oil. Her eyes, once bright and full of life, were now hollow, distant, like someone who had seen too much and felt too little. Ayaka had been a seamstress before the war. She made beautiful kimonos, delicate silk garments embroidered with flowers and birds and scenes from nature. She took pride in her work, in the precision of each stitch, in creating beauty in a world that needed beauty. She believed in tradition, in honor, in the values her parents had taught her: respect, duty, compassion, harmony. But the war had destroyed all of that. The war had taken everything she loved and turned it to ash. Her husband, Kenji, had been conscripted in 1942. He was sent to fight in China, in the brutal campaign that had already claimed hundreds of thousands of Japanese lives. He was a scholar, a teacher, a gentleman who loved poetry and philosophy. He didn't believe in war, but belief didn't matter. The empire called, and he had to answer. He wrote her letters, beautiful letters filled with longing and sorrow and hope. He wrote about missing home, about dreaming of the day they would be together again, about the life they would build when the war ended. He never wrote about what he was doing, what he was seeing, what was being done in the name of the emperor. The letters stopped in 1943. No explanation,
No notification. Just silence. Ayaka waited months for news. Any news. But none came. Eventually, a government official visited her and told her that Kenji was missing in action, presumed dead. That was all. No body, no grave, no closure. Just a bureaucratic phrase that meant her husband had vanished from the earth, and she would never know how or why. Her son, Hiroshi, was only 6 years old when the firebombing raids began. He was a small, quiet boy who loved to draw pictures of fish and boats. He wanted to be a fisherman like his grandfather. He dreamed of sailing the ocean, of catching giant tuna, of bringing home fish so big they would feed the whole town. But he never got the chance. In March 1945, American bombers targeted Shimoda's harbor, trying to destroy the naval facilities there. The bombs fell at night, without warning, turning the sky into fire. Ayaka grabbed Hiroshi and ran, but the fire was faster. It consumed everything. Houses, streets, people.
Hiroshi died in her arms. His small body burned beyond recognition, his last breath a whisper, "Mama, it hurts." Within 3 years, Ayaka had lost everything. Her husband, her son, her home, her reason to live. She moved through each day like a ghost, her body functioning but her soul somewhere else, somewhere the pain couldn't reach. She worked in a munitions factory now, assembling weapons she knew would kill other mothers' sons. She didn't care anymore. Nothing mattered. The world had become a nightmare, and she was just waiting for it to end. And then, one sweltering August afternoon, everything changed again. The factory had been shut down. The managers said it was for maintenance, but everyone knew the truth. There were no more materials, no more steel, no more copper. The supply lines had collapsed. The empire was running on fumes.
Ayaka walked home through streets littered with rubble and debris. The town was dying. Half the buildings were burned-out shells. The harbor was filled with sunken ships, their masts jutting from the water like grave markers. The air smelled like smoke and decay. She heard the crying before she saw it. A baby, wailing, desperate, terrified. The sound came from an alley between two collapsed buildings. Ayaka almost kept walking. What did it matter? Another orphan. Another casualty of war. There were thousands of them now, children wandering the streets, starving, dying, forgotten. But something made her stop. Some instinct. Some remnant of the person she used to be. She turned into the alley. The baby was lying in a wooden crate, wrapped in a dirty blanket. Maybe 6 months old. Crying so hard its face was purple, its tiny fists clenched, its body shaking. It was covered in grime and soot. Alone. Abandoned.
Ayaka knelt beside the crate. The baby's eyes locked onto hers. It stopped crying for a moment, just staring, as if trying to understand whether this person would hurt or help. Then Ayaka saw it. The blanket. It wasn't Japanese. The weaving was wrong. The pattern was foreign. And pinned to the blanket was a small metal tag with English letters. American. This was an American baby. Ayaka's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced. How? Why? American prisoners? A downed pilot? Someone's secret affair? It didn't matter. What mattered was that this baby was the enemy. The enemy who had killed her son. The enemy who had burned her city. The enemy who had destroyed everything. She should leave it, Walk away. Let it die. That would be justice, wouldn't it? An enemy child for her child. A life for a life. But when she looked at the baby's face, she didn't see the enemy. She saw Hiroshi. The same small nose. The same helpless vulnerability. The same desperate need for someone, anyone, to care. Her hands moved before her mind could stop them. She picked up the baby, cradled it against her chest. It was so light, so fragile, barely alive. "Shh," she whispered. "Shh, I've got you." And in that moment, everything she believed about the war, about duty, about honor, about justice, shattered like glass. Ayaka brought the baby home. She didn't know what else to do. She couldn't leave it in the alley to die. She couldn't bring herself to walk away. So she carried it through the ruined streets, hiding it under her coat, terrified that someone would see, that someone would ask questions. Her house was small, cramped, barely more than a single room with a kitchen. But it was private. No one bothered her here. No one came to visit. She was alone, invisible, forgotten. She laid the baby on the floor and unwrapped the blanket. A girl. Maybe 5 or 6 months old, severely malnourished, her ribs showing through her skin, her belly distended from starvation. She had sores on her arms and legs. Her diaper, if you could call it that, was filthy and soaked.
Ayaka worked quickly, mechanically. She heated water, cleaned the baby, found clean cloth to use as a diaper. She had no baby food, no formula, so she boiled rice until it was soft and mashed it into a thin paste. She fed the baby slowly, carefully, watching her swallow each tiny spoonful. The baby ate like she was starving, because she was. She ate until her tiny stomach couldn't hold anymore, then fell asleep in Ayaka's arms, her breathing shallow but steady. Ayaka sat there, holding this enemy child, this stranger, this burden she had chosen to carry. And she wept. For the first time since Hiroshi died, she wept. Not from grief, not from despair, from something else, something she couldn't name. For 3 days, Ayaka kept the baby hidden. She told no one, went nowhere, just stayed in her house, caring for this child who shouldn't exist, who shouldn't be alive, who was a death sentence waiting to happen.
She fed her, changed her, sang to her old lullabies she had sung to Hiroshi. The baby grew stronger, started to smile, started to reach for Ayaka's face with tiny, curious fingers. And Ayaka felt something she thought was dead. Hope. Not for herself, for this child, this innocent life that had nothing to do with war or hatred or revenge. But on the 4th day, someone knocked on her door. Ayaka froze. The baby was sleeping in the corner, wrapped in blankets. The knock came again, harder, more insistent. "Tanaka-san, open the door. Military police." Her heart stopped. She looked at the baby. There was nowhere to hide her, nowhere to run. The door slammed open. 2 officers stepped inside, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. Behind them stood their neighbor, Mrs. Yoshida, an old woman with suspicious eyes who had always watched everything, always reported everything to the authorities.
"She has an enemy child," Mrs. Yoshida said, pointing at Ayaka with a gnarled finger. "I heard it crying. An American baby. She's harboring the enemy." One of the officers walked to the corner and pulled back the blankets. The baby looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. He stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable.
Then he turned to Ayaka. "Is this true? Is this an American child?" Ayaka's mind screamed at her to lie, to deny, to say she found it just now, that she was going to report it, that she would never betray the empire. But she couldn't. The lie wouldn't come. "Yes," she whispered. The officer's face hardened. "You know the law. Aiding the enemy is treason, punishable by death." "She's a baby," Ayaka said, her voice shaking. "She's innocent." "There are no innocents in war," the officer said. "Only us and them. And you have chosen them."
They took Ayaka that day, dragged her from her house while the baby screamed. Mrs. Yoshida took the child, holding it at arm's length like it was diseased, muttering about duty and loyalty and the contamination of enemy blood. Ayaka was thrown into a cell beneath the military headquarters. No trial, no lawyer, no chance to explain. Just a cold stone room with a single barred window that let in a sliver of gray light. She sat in that cell for 2 days, waiting, thinking, wondering if the baby was still alive, if they'd killed her, abandoned her, sent her somewhere to die slowly. And she thought about her choice, whether it had been worth it, whether saving one enemy child mattered when the whole world was drowning in death. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw that baby's face. And she knew, somehow, that she had done the right thing. Even if it killed her. Even if no one ever knew. Even if history would record her as a traitor.
She had chosen mercy. And mercy, she realized, was the only thing that made her human. On the 3rd day, they came for her. 2 guards unlocked her cell and led her up a narrow staircase to a courtyard behind the building. The sun was setting, painting the sky red and gold. Beautiful. Cruelly beautiful. She expected a firing squad, expected to die. But instead, there was just one man waiting, an officer she didn't recognize, older than the others, his face weathered and scarred. "Tanaka Ayaka," he said. His voice was tired, sad. "You have been found guilty of treason against the empire. The sentence is death." Ayaka nodded. She had known. From the moment they took her, she had known. "However," the officer continued, "the emperor has decreed a general amnesty for certain crimes in light of the current circumstances." Ayaka's head snapped up. "What?" "The war is over, Tanaka-san. Japan has surrendered. The emperor announced it this morning. The Americans are coming, and with them, their laws, their justice." He paused, watching her face carefully. "You will not be executed. Instead, you will be exiled from this town. You will be marked as a traitor. You will be shunned by your people. You will live the rest of your life in disgrace." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But you will live, and so will the child you saved." Ayaka's legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Not from relief, from something deeper, from the realization that her choice, her impossible choice, had meant something after all. "Where is she?" Ayaka asked. "The baby, where is she?" "The Americans took her. She's with their medical corps now. They'll find her family, or find her a new one. She'll survive, because of you." He turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth,
Tanaka-san, I think you did the right thing. In a different world, we would call you a hero. But in this world, you're a traitor. That's how history will remember you."
Ayaka was released that evening. She walked through the streets of Shimoda, past the people who had been her neighbors, her friends. They turned their backs, spat at her feet, called her traitor, coward, disgrace. She didn't care. She walked until she reached the edge of town, where the road disappeared into the forest. And she kept walking, away from the town, away from the war, away from everything. But she carried something with her now, something that couldn't be taken away. The knowledge that in a world gone mad, she had chosen sanity. That in a war that demanded hatred, she had chosen love. That when everything said to kill, she had chosen to save. Years later, Ayaka would tell her story to a journalist. She was old by then, her hair white, her hands trembling with age. She lived alone in a small village in the mountains, forgotten by history, invisible to the world.
The journalist asked her if she regretted it, if she wished she had made a different choice. Ayaka smiled. It was the first time she had smiled in decades. "Regret," she said. "No. That baby is the only good thing I did in my entire life. The only thing that mattered. Everything else, all the suffering, all the shame, it was worth it. Because somewhere in this world, that child grew up. She lived, she laughed, she loved. And that's more than I can say for my own son." She paused, her eyes distant, looking at something the journalist couldn't see. "War takes everything from us," she said quietly. "Our homes, our families, our souls. But it can't take our choices. And I chose mercy. I chose humanity. I chose to be more than what the war wanted me to be." She looked at the journalist, her eyes clear and bright, despite her age. "That's all any of us can do. Choose who we are, even when the world is burning down around us." The journalist published her story. It was read by thousands. One of those readers was a woman in California, in her 60s, who had been adopted as a baby after the war. She had always wondered about her birth mother, about the woman who had left her in that alley. But now she knew. There was no birth mother who had abandoned her. There was a Japanese woman who had found her, saved her, sacrificed everything for her. A stranger, an enemy, a hero. She booked a flight to Japan, found Ayaka's village, knocked on her door. When Ayaka opened it and saw this woman, this American woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, she knew. Somehow, she knew. They didn't speak the same language. They had no translator. But they didn't need words. The woman knelt, took Ayaka's hands, pressed them to her forehead, and wept. And Ayaka, this old woman who had carried shame and sorrow for 50 years, finally felt something she thought she would never feel again. Peace. Because sometimes mercy is rewarded, not in this life, not in the way we expect, but in ways that transcend justice, transcend understanding, transcend even time itself. Because in the end, we are not defined by the wars we fight. We are defined by the lives we save, by the moments when we choose compassion over hatred, by the times we risk everything to do what's right, even when no one is watching, even when history will call us traitors. That is what it means to be human. That is what it means to survive. Not just to live, but to remain ourselves in a world that demands we become monsters.
And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough.